Far Cry 5 is a game that allows you to do many things, such as stroke a bear called Cheeseburger.
Remember, don't actually feed him cheeseburgers, because, you know, he's got the diabetes.
Kill rowdy white men who looks like they have taken all the drugs from the 80s, and of course, really show who your character is through the speaking role of Minecraft Steve. No, but seriously, on a real note, Far Cry 5 really does try a lot, and I may say it might be the most bold Far Cry game to date, having an extremely large map with 4 villains, and having the ability to traverse the map through both plane, boat, and car. Now, this Far Cry also has the most controversial villain to date, not because he's actually controversial, but because a large part of the Far Cry community say that he's just a boring crazy dude, and the other half say he's the best Far Cry villain to this day. So join me today so we can find out if the father / Joseph Seed is truly a good and incredible villain, or if he is just a terrible character written poorly. Before I continue with this video, guys, I just want to say a massive thank you to all of you who watched my last video. If you haven't seen it, I would really urge that you check it out. It's on Pagan Min, and I think you guys would enjoy it, but just thank you guys so much for the support. I'm trying to get my views up, which I'm hoping, fingers crossed, with the strategies I'm using for this video, and a lot of faith, it would have worked. So thank you guys ever so much for watching. If you want to support the channel in any way, just hit subscribe. I don't get paid yet, but with more subscribers, I can, and that means I can keep uploading more and more videos like this. Thank you guys ever so much for watching, and enjoy the video. To understand the point of the father / Joseph Seed, I want to jump straight into the core reason they placed him into the game. Why is Joseph Seed in Far Cry 5? Well, in short terms, I truly believe the reason why the father's character is in Far Cry 5 is to show the player that he is right. The father throughout Far Cry 5 talks about how the end of the world is coming, how no matter what happens, it will be okay because the father is right, because he hears God, and in the end, he is right.
Say to the angels, go your ways, and pour from the vials the wrath of God upon the earth.
You what?
As no matter what ending you get, the father lives, the father wins, and Joseph Seed is right. Now, how does Joseph Seed being right play a part in the overall story? Well, let's take a look. Throughout the events of Far Cry 5, your main goal is to stop and oppose everything that Joseph Seed and his cult is doing. This means you pretty much are the opposite of Joseph Seed, meaning you want the cult to fall and he wants the cult to succeed. Now, this creates quite a nice contrast because the player believes that what they're doing is right because Joseph Seed is insane, whereas Joseph believes the end of the world is coming, so what he's doing is justified and he is right. Now, the interesting thing about this is, unlike traditional villains who in the end are wrong and fail and die or are defeated, Joseph is right and wins. Now, the father believes he has been told by God that the end of the world is coming, so creates this cult that kills people. Yeah, not sure how that saves everyone from the end of the world, but let's continue. Now, we of course are led to believe that the father is wrong and that he is just an insane person who needs to be stopped. But with the father being right in the end, surely this changes everything. Surely this makes the father, Joseph Seed, one of the smartest Far Cry villains of all time, and changes everything. Well, let's take a look if the father has good reason to know the events of the game which happen, and if he is a truly deep and interesting character, or is he just one with too much plot convenience? Does he deserve to have the power to know what will happen and have the power to be right in the end? Does it make his overall character better, or does it make it far worse? And is he justified in thinking he can hear God's voice? Well, to find out if Joseph Seed being right at the end of the game makes sense and is good for the game, we'll have to go back to the roots. We'll have to go back to Joseph Seed's lore and everything we know about him. We know that Joseph Seed, when growing up, had no parents, so went between carer to carer. This made life very difficult for him, and it was at this very young age that he would start to believe he heard God's voice. This is the same voice he claims he hears throughout the course of Far Cry 5's story. This, of course, is Joseph's core basis that he can predict the future, is that he claims or he thinks he can hear God's voice. Joseph heard God's voice a long time throughout his life, but the more and more he heard his voice, the more sinister and violent things he would hear. One day, Joseph got a phone call that his wife, who was heavily pregnant with their child, had just got into a car accident pregnant and sadly didn't make it, but the child did. When Joseph went to see the child, filled with rage, sadness and despair, the voice of God played in his head once again. The voice told him to end his infant child's life, in which Joseph couldn't take it anymore and gave in to that voice and did.
You're not the only one to be tested. Did you know that I had a wife? So beautiful, isn't she? We were pregnant with our first child. And we were just babies ourselves, really. And I was terrified. I'm becoming a father. Mostly about money. She wasn't worried. She had faith that things were going to work out. And I knew. I heard God's plan for me. I took my fingers and I put them on that little plastic tube.
From this point onwards, Joseph was a completely changed man, and eventually this would lead him to form Eden's Gate, the cult. Now, from this moment onwards, you could view Joseph in two very different ways. One being that he clearly had a very hard life, and you take pity on the man, struggling with mental health, going through multiple care homes and houses, and then finally losing his wife, who I'm sure he loved very dearly. Now, from all this, you could say that Joseph Seed is an incredibly deep and intricate character because of the hardships and pain this man has clearly had to go through, paired with the extremely bad mental health issues. You could say that Joseph Seed was not right about much in his life and got the bad end of the stick often. You could argue that this man, who surely has only ever got things wrong in life, now gets the one prediction of the world right, because he has been beaten so bloody, so brutal and so hard that he truly believes in himself, and he believes that he is right because he is determined to finally be right. And in the end, you could say that Joseph Seed being right is just truly poetic. Or, on the other hand, you could equally argue that his character is just insane, and that's all there is to it. And trust me, the cracks in Joseph's character do start to form very quickly. For example, everything about his childhood that I just told you is never brought up in the game. In fact, the only loving side of Joseph we get to see is when he talks about his wife, and how she was so tragically ripped away from him.
The Lord. And one day she was going to go visit a friend. There was an accident. The Lord take it. They rushed me to a hospital and put me in a room with this little pink bundle stuffed with tubes. And they said that I had to be strong. Take it, huh? You're not the only one to be tested. Did you know that I had a wife?
For him to then ruin this very touching and beautiful scene by turning around and saying, "Oh yeah, and by the way, I killed my infant child because La Funny Voices told me to, lol." Overall, this just makes his character feel a lot less deep and a lot less complex, and it makes him being right in the end feel like he's not right because of this big poetic moment, but more because the writers wanted him to be right and wanted a moment in the game where they could say, "Look, the bad man was right all along? Who would have thought?" Now, out of the two, I personally lean more to the side that says that it makes Joseph's character weaker, as we're never really shown in the game anything about Joseph's childhood or any points in the game where we can really give him sympathy. And now, you may be saying, hold on a minute, Truth.
Objection!
How come you gave Pagan Min a pass because everything that happened to him was because of other people, but not Joseph Seed? I'm writing a mean comment after I subscribe and hit the bell. Well, my dear viewer, let me tell you the difference. Pagan Min's lore is explained to us at the end of the game. He tells us why he does what he does, or we more or less can guess why he does what he does from what he tells us. Or hell, he can even tell us at the start of the game if we simply hear the man out. Killing Pagan Min early and not getting that dialogue is you being selfish and not hearing Pagan Min out, not letting him tell you his story. We can understand that Pagan Min has been made evil by the people around him from what he tells us, whereas we don't get any of that from Joseph Seed unless you look into books or look online. And I think it should be the core game's job anyway to convince you to either agree with Joseph Seed, feel sympathy for Joseph Seed, or hate him. Sure, by the end of Far Cry 5, Joseph Seed is right, but it doesn't mean shit when we don't understand why he's right, how he's right, or why he deserves to be right. And sure, some of the monologues he does are fantastic and he brings up a lot of good points in those monologues.
My brother John was loved by few, feared by many, misunderstood by all, has been opened. My brother Jacob was a fighter. He fought our parents. He fought the government. He fought me. Has been opened. My family, my brothers, my sisters, they've been taken from me by a snake in the garden!
And I really do think they were going in the right direction with Joseph Seed's head. Having a man who thinks he can hear God is a very interesting premise, but I really think they should have focused on more time exploring Joseph's head. And I overall think his mental state should have been something that was focused on a lot heavier. But let's try to see what works for Joseph Seed's character and what doesn't. In my opinion, the best part about Joseph Seed's character is his fantastic performance and his great monologues he does throughout the game. The actor who plays Joseph Seed's name is Greg Brick, and overall he does an incredible job with the character. Every single one of his performances feels like he's putting absolutely everything into it, and it just brings the piece completely to life. In fact, his performance is actually so good, I would argue if you were to take away all the meaning from what Joseph Seed's character is monologuing about, you would still have a really incredibly enjoyable character to watch and interact with. There's this really strange and eerie, creepy presence about the father, which just makes you feel really uncomfortable, and when you don't feel uncomfortable, you feel very threatened. It's odd because there's a lot of moments in the game where Greg makes the father feel like he's a very loving and accepting and almost forgiving character, but there's always this creepy presence. Not like Pagan Min, where you can completely get on with that guy 100% of the time. Father has this extremely creepy presence lingering over him, and it's amazing. I think the best scenes with the father is when you take out another villain who's either his fake sister Faith or one of his two brothers, and you get this really emotional and power-driven commemorate speech, and it's just really, really powerful. And this is the father at his best when he's doing these speeches. They're powerful, they're great, they're threatening, and there's some emotion behind them. However, I won't lie, the weakest part of the father's character is also probably his monologues, as they don't really stand out compared to other Far Cry villains and aren't as strong as most other Far Cry villains. Villains like Pagan and Vaas seem like they're always trying to get their point across to you crystal clear, whereas the father kinda just seems like he's rambling, and a lot of the time he's just saying bad shit, insane stuff.
And when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of the martyrs, slain because of the word of God. The corporations have been erased. It means the world has been cleansed by God's righteous fire. But most of all, I was right.
Like in the scene where he describes how he lost his wife, I really thought this would also tell us why he thinks the cult is the answer to the end of the world and why he thinks he can hear God's voice. But no. And at first, this scene is really touching, telling us about how he lost his wife, but then he just goes on to say he killed his son because of the voices, like I said before, and it sort of ruins the emotional balance of the scene. And I want to make my point crystal clear here, I don't think having just a crazy villain is a bad thing. What I do think is a bad thing is having a villain who you justify as not being insane and you want to be deeper than they actually are. Vaas from Far Cry 3 worked because he was fucking insane, but that was the point Ubisoft were trying to make with that game, whereas this game, it doesn't really feel like there is a point to make. Sure, in the end the father's right, and it seems like they're trying to go off of this thing that the father in the end no matter what is right. But the problem is that's not really very deep when we don't understand why he's right, what trauma he's been through to have this mental hearing of God, or anything really about him. And it's a real shame because I think the father on concept is a really cool character. Someone whose mind is slowly being taken over by what he thinks are the depictions of God, for everyone to think he's crazy, for it to be true. That sounds cool. However, it doesn't really work if he is just some insane person. The reason why Pagan Min works and the reason why we like Pagan Min is because in the end we learn that he was made evil. The father, he kinda just started off evil and ended up evil. Like I say, I really like this idea of a character's mind who's been corrupted by insanity, but oh wait, they already did that successfully with Vaas. I think in hindsight they should have dived way deeper inside Joseph Seed's head so we could understand where he's coming from, and more importantly, why he is right. Now I would say there is also one other reason that lets Joseph Seed's character and villain down quite a bit, and that's the other villains in Far Cry 5, because they're just so good. The villains I'm talking about, of course, are John and Jacob, Joseph's brothers, and of course Faith Seed, Joseph's unrelated sister, and in my opinion, I find these villains a lot more compelling than Joseph, so let's start by taking a look at John Seed. John Seed is the brother of Joseph, and his whole thing is the power of yes. Just giving in and saying yes. Giving in to Joseph and saying yes. Giving in to John and saying yes. And giving in to the events that will follow and saying yes. John's role in the cult is to get people to say yes so they can wipe away their sins. Now, why is John Seed so fixated on the belief in just giving in and saying yes to people and things and events that follow? Well, because in a very emotional scene with John, he tells us that his parents used to ferociously beat and abuse him, and the only way to get them to stop was to give in and say yes.
My parents were the first ones to teach me about the power of yes. One night they took me into the kitchen and they threw me on the ground, and I experienced pain after pain after pain after pain. And when I didn't think I could take any more, I did. Something broke free inside. I wasn't scared, I was clear. I looked up at them. I started to laugh. All I could say was, yes.
He did lead quite a successful life, becoming a lawyer in fact and making pretty good money. However, his childhood trauma would kick in at every opportunity it got, which damaged him beyond the point he thought it could be reversed. This led John to truly believe that the only way to live life was to just say yes. So of course, when Joseph made a cult, he said yes, and became the man who wiped away sins by making people say yes. His character is extremely in-depthly looked at throughout the game and very powerful, giving off this very creepy and weird vibe. In my opinion, John is the one who is most like Joseph out of the three siblings. He can be deadly, he can be manipulative, and he can be smart. I really enjoy his character, and it actually has quite a lot of depth. But what about the other brother? What about Jacob? Is he as in-depth? Jacob Seed is the brute force leader of the cult, brainwashing you multiple times throughout the game into killing your friends and allies. He believes that people will give in to change when they are forced to by matter of torture or pain. He believed this after serving in the Iraq War, where he lost a lot of friends and then getting into one circumstance that would change him forever. He and his best friend were stranded in the middle of a desert. With the supplies that they had, they knew they wouldn't make it back to base. So Jacob killed his best friend and ate him so he could provide the means to get back to base, and thus Jacob would live.
I was in Iraq during the first Gulf War. 82nd Airborne All-Americans, hoorah! One night there was an ambush, and me and this guy named Miller got separated from the unit. No food, no radio. Nearest base, 200 clicks to the south, so we just started walking. Well, by the third day I knew we were lost. Day 6, ran out of water. You know what that's like, don't you? Difficult to swallow. On the 7th day, Miller's legs started going all wonky. Did you know your brain starts to eat your muscles in order to survive? That's why you're so goddamn skinny. And by the 8th day, the wolves were closing in. And I looked at Miller and I could tell we were as good as dead. And I accepted that. And in that acceptance came clarity. You see, I wasn't just looking at Miller. I was looking at an opportunity. It wasn't something I wanted. It was something that I had to do.
Once the army found out about this, they obviously discharged him and sent him to a mental hospital until he ran out of money and thus was forced to go to a homeless shelter. All of this allows the player to have sympathy for Jacob, as he clearly had nowhere to turn, and from the Iraq War his brain was screwed. But how does Faith Seed hold up against her brothers? I wanted to talk about Faith Seed last because she's arguably the best written character in Far Cry 5's story. Faith Seed is not actually the first Faith. In fact, there had been many more. The father would prey on young girls who had a lot of issues and then get them addicted to the drug he made called Bliss, so they would do what he said. In this Faith's case, it was already easy for the father, as Faith was already a drug addict who thought that the father would help her, but in fact did the opposite. Faith throughout Far Cry 5 is actually not very violent at all and only wants the player to join her. She probably doesn't even know she's doing anything wrong because of the Bliss, and we know that the father will hurt her if she doesn't do what he says.
Help. She was all alone. She wanted to die. And then she met the father. He gave her hope and confidence. The father showed her how special she was. She was full of love and life. He gave her a new family, one that accepted her just as she was. The young woman no longer wished to die. She had been given purpose.
This makes Faith's story extremely touching and very emotional. All of these three characters are written so well and are so fun to interact with, and they all do have a point to make about this fucked up world we'd live in. In fact, they kind of make more of a point about the world than Joseph does, and I thought the whole point of Joseph's character was to kind of convince the player that the world is going to shit. So does Joseph deserve to be this character who in the end is right? Well, we've looked at Joseph in quite an in-depth way, and we've looked at the people around him. Well, I would say yes and no. Joseph Seed's actor Greg Brick does a fantastic job at presenting Joseph as this creepy, intimidating, and overall massive threat to Hope County. Pair all of this with some fantastic speeches, his childhood trauma, and the fact he claims to know God's plan, and we could say that yes, Joseph Seed deserves to be right. But on the other hand, Joseph's character really isn't fleshed out too well, especially with some scenes feeling like they're only there to have him be edgy and cool for about a few seconds. Oh, hello Joseph. Oh, yeah, nice one mate. Cheers. Yeah, okay mate, thank you. Pair this with the fact that you could just claim that he is just an insane villain, which would be nothing special to the Far Cry series. Put all of this together, and in my opinion, I would say that no, Joseph Seed doesn't deserve to be right in the end, and isn't this big, interesting villain. So in conclusion, is Joseph Seed a well-written villain or a poorly written villain? Well, to start off with, the performance and monologues Greggs puts on are incredible and just overall mind-blowingly good. If you take everything away from Joseph, other than his performances, he is still an incredibly enjoyable and fun character to watch. However, his character is very poorly fleshed out, with there almost being no reasoning behind the cult, behind Joseph's motives, or behind why Joseph can predict the future in the first place. The writing, in my opinion, makes Joseph's character seem a lot more weaker, and with the two very lackluster endings, it really doesn't help Joseph's character. Pair this with the fact that, in my opinion, the side villains in Far Cry 5 are far better, more deep, and better fleshed out in general. So sadly, I would have to say that no, Joseph Seed is not a well-written villain or character overall. Thank you guys ever so much for watching this video. If you liked this video, I would urge you to like and subscribe. The support I got from last video was overwhelming, and I really do appreciate it, so if you're new to the channel, please do subscribe, as 97% of you watching this video won't be subscribed, so please do make sure to subscribe. I have even more videos coming out on Far Cry characters very soon, so make sure to stay tuned with the bell on, and I will see you all in the next video. Stay safe guys, and peace.